Hi, this is Adios Amigo, and I'm going to be doing a short, I'm going to be doing a relatively short individual review for the Sony MDR ZX110. It's something that had been requested, sort of, and yeah, why not? Sounds like fun. And so, really, this kind of headphone and the other headphones I'm going to be reviewing alongside it for this little series of headphones under like 25 or 50 bucks, you have to really think about what you're buying them for. Typically, if you're getting them in this price category, they're either going to be like a stocking stuffer gift of some kind, or you're on a budget and you just need a headphone to fulfill a very particular purpose. Now, if that purpose is mobile use at home, gaming, music, media consumption, are you going to be using it on a bus, on a plane, in a coffee shop, at home? Do you have to worry about bothering other people? These things are all going to matter, right? And so the value equation is going to change a little bit. Your own particular tastes might change a little bit. So some things I'm going to discuss with this are going to be what's the intended purpose, what's it optimized for doing, what's it sound like, what are the comfort considerations, all the things that are kind of going to go into the mix of information you need to take in when you're thinking about purchasing a pair of headphones. Price would be in there too. I'll discuss that later. The first I'm going to discuss is the intended use. Now, these are closed back headphones. Whether or not that means they're going to isolate sound for you is not a guarantee, but there's typically, generally, closed backs are going to do it better, open backs are going to do it worse. That's not always true, but that is the general rule of thumb. And so I've actually done some testing with this. I had a piece of paper that had some interesting results. I'm going to throw on some footage as well of me testing this. In particular, I had a sound pressure meter set at a fixed 10 inches away from the headphones, set on a foam block. And let's see, did I put it over here? And I noticed one interesting thing about that was, surprisingly, the meter was picking up certain frequencies more strongly than others, which I hadn't really accounted for. And that resulted in a, I don't know how else to say it, but it kind of made the results not the most clear, especially because there we go. Especially because some of the headphones have higher frequency response, like an emphasis on the higher frequency response and a higher emphasis on the lower frequency response. And really what that resulted in was kind of uneven measurements, because those with more bass focus didn't pop as much on the meter and those with the treble focus did. So I did a separate test where I would actually go fixed distances away. Within my household, I would go about bird's eye 10 feet away in another room, so there's actually a wall and then like a doorway off center, so it was kind of more like a horseshoe root, but bird's eye, it was 10 feet. And then 20 feet away in a more clear shot distance, and then 40 feet was basically on the other side of my house. And if I could hear the headphones from those distances, I would mark it down. And so the Sony, I was able to hear about, yeah, so from 10, I could hear it clearly 10 feet away in the next room, with complete silence. Well, not complete silence, it's ambient sound, right? Because I live in a house, I can't make everyone else be quiet. Even with the neighbor mowing the lawn, I could still hear it. At 20 feet, I could still hear it no problem. Beyond that, I was not able to hear them. So essentially, if you can imagine like a straight shot through the house, about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through, I had this set up in the kitchen. In the office room behind it, I could still hear it. Halfway to my garage, I could still hear it. And then at my garage door, I could not hear it. Okay. So that's a mediocre. It's not the most closed back. I mean, some of these really isolated well. By contrast, for instance, the Koss, which are open back, I was able to hear clearly all the way to the garage, and I could still hear and hum to the tune of the music. So those really don't isolate that well at all. So yeah, these aren't the greatest. People are probably still going to hear what's going on, what you're listening to, if they're decently close and there's not too much ambient noise to kind of drown out the sound. But it's not terrible. It's not terrible for the price. It's not great. It's not terrible. Another thing is, if you want to get these for work, right? If you want something that you can do like work calls with, these don't have a microphone on it. So that's right out. You can't do it. This pretty much means that you'd have to get a secondary microphone, which you can do. You can do. It's kind of a pain in the butt to set up, and it adds a lot of cost, especially when you're buying something this budget. I assume the budget matters. So yeah, no microphone built in. And I mean, that's it. If you're, for the intended use on this, it would have to be mobile use for me that extends into home use. And it would have to be primarily either entertainment or music related. It can work in, video games and other stuff too, but it's really not what it's meant for, which I'll discuss later. So sound-wise, it's got a pretty strong V-curve that leans warm, right? In other words, the bass response is very strong. The treble response towards the upper range becomes a little bit more present, and that there's a valley between them where the mids feel sucked out. Now, on some music, it's pretty apparent and not that great. And on other music, you won't even notice the difference. Now, one thing I will say is that the music doesn't sound bad, right? The music doesn't sound unbalanced. Normally what happens is it just sounds like those particular instruments or the vocals are further away. And so certain things sound much closer and certain things sound much further. It still sounds okay though, especially for $10. It still sounds okay. The bass is a bit overly present. It can be a little boomy. It's not the tightest. It does have impact, so it can be a little distracting depending on the type of music that you're listening to. But one nice thing about them is it really doesn't bleed into the mids too badly. So you don't get that weird sort of muddiness when you have the mids and bass playing at the same time. It actually keeps them relatively separate. Let's see. It doesn't sound like there's a particular veil for some of the mids. It just sounds like there's distance between you and the instruments. So I wouldn't say it's the most clear, but it's also not Like, it doesn't have that weird fuzziness to it. The imaging on these, not the greatest. You get left and right, and then they arc forward towards center by about 40, 45 degrees. And then some songs manage to get a clear center image, and then other songs do not manage to get that clear center image. Generally, they tend just to get to that 45-degree arc to the front, right? So like this. So they're not the best, but it's doable. I use these in games, and the imaging was fine. They worked fine. I played Crucible and Destiny 2, Doom, and Resident Evil Village. I knew where the enemies were coming from. I didn't have to worry too much about it. So these can work as an all-purpose headphone. You don't have to treat them like they only have one and one use only. They can flex into other things. But the design is primarily geared towards probably media consumption on the go. The layering is surprisingly enjoyable, actually. Normally, I'm a big vocals forward person. But I can still enjoy listening to music on these, even with them being, you know, some steps back behind the rest of all the other instruments. Still enjoyable. I was shocked, to be honest. Let's see. The treble, like I was saying, they're warm. Even when you get to the higher end, the treble is rounded off. Even when there's a little bit more energy to it, it still doesn't have that kind of like bright shininess, that sparkle, that little bit of sizzle to it, where like when you get the right trumpet note, you have to almost decide like, do I need to plug my ears right now? Like it's got that little bit of happy pain, you know? This doesn't have that. It won't ever have that. Very relaxing, very chill back. I mean, the bass isn't relaxing, but the treble certainly isn't going to stab anyone in the ears. Build quality. Fixed cables. So if you do want a mic, you're going to have to find a way to get an external mic. External cables also means you can't change the length of the mic. So if you sit super far from whatever you're plugging this into, you only have about like 4 feet to get it done. So if you're more than that, you're kind of either need to get an extension or you're in trouble. I actually did a weigh-in of the headphones, so you can see how much they weigh, as well as what additional weight the cables add, especially for the length. They are very efficient. So that's good. You could power these with a half-empty bag of potato chips, so that's good. The materials are clearly plastic. Rattly plastic. Part of that has to do with the fact that they have a built-in gimbal so that you can rotate these up and fold them and put them away. Which is neat, you know. It's, clearly they're meant to be packed away for mobile usage. And the locking actually isn't like super jank. It actually feels pretty positive locking down or up when you fold them up. And because of that gimbal, you also get a little bit of movement with these ear cups, which is actually pretty nice. And, you know, obviously you get some good movement this way as well. And then you also have these adjustable sliders. Comfort-wise, they're actually not bad. The ear pads concerned me when they first came in, but they're softer than they look. And the material isn't as abrasive as I expected it to be, so it actually ends up being relatively comfortable. They do heat up on your ears, especially because they're closed backs and they're sitting on your ears, so you're going to get some warmth there. Not the worst, though, not to the point where I had to take them off at least. The cable itself is actually kind of chonkers. It's thick, heavy plastic rubber kind of mix, almost like old phone line cabling. Um, that's kind of a bummer. It does jank pretty easily, but it also unjanks if you take the time to just kind of like straighten it out and let it sit for a bit. Which I did, and it did a relatively decent job. It's not perfect, but it still does the job. Um, I mean, that's really about it. They're not super complicated. They can do most jobs relatively well for the price. They make a great gift if you just want to get someone a cheap pair of headphones. Uh, the stage isn't that great, admittedly. It's pretty small. I don't think you're gonna blow anyone's minds with these. They're just decent, right? And for $10, decent's good. That decent for $10 is good value. So, I on this particular list of specifically on ear and over ear. $10 is the cheapest on the list, and this is probably one of the better value just because of how affordable it is. So yeah, that's the Sony MDR ZX110. This has been Adios Amigo, and I'll catch you on the next entry of the series.